They humiliated a quiet black girl. Big mistake. Her clandestine boxing skills shocked everyone. The air in the 50th floor boardroom of Sterling and Reed Architecture in downtown Chicago was thin and sharp with tension. Sunlight glinted off the glass and steel skyline, but inside, all eyes were on a massive digital screen. "And this," announced Julian Croft, his voice smooth as polished marble, "is the future. The Monarch Tower." His flashy digital rendering of a skyscraper spiraled into the sky, a breathtaking illusion of perfection. The clients and junior architects in the room were captivated. Then, with a theatrical sigh, Julian gestured dismissively toward a small table in the corner. "Of course, we also have this cute little hobby project from our junior staff." There, on the forgotten table, sat an intricate, handcrafted physical model of the same tower. It was made of wood, plaster, and wire, built with a watchmaker's precision. Next to it, her hands resting calmly on the table's edge, stood Ilara Vance. She was 28, quiet, and had spent the last 4 months pouring her soul into that model. She didn't flinch or look up. Her gaze remained fixed on her work. Julian, a senior partner known for his charisma and ruthless ambition, smirked. He held up his expensive digital stylus. "This is where the real work is done," he said, tapping his tablet. "Not with sticks and glue." A few executives chuckled, but Leo, a young intern standing by the door, looked back and forth between the flawless digital image on the screen and the solid, detailed model in the corner. A knot of confusion tightened in his stomach. He could see the weight and integrity in Ilara's model, and he could feel, somehow, that something about Julian's perfect picture was terribly wrong. Ilara's only reaction was to pick up a simple, worn-down graphite pencil from beside her model, its wood smoothed by years of use. She held it loosely in her fingers, its solid feel a silent contrast to Julian's flickering screen. The forced laughter in the room confirmed Julian's power. Most of the team, eager to stay in his good graces, nodded along. They saw Ilara's silence as defeat, a confirmation that her old-world methods were obsolete. But a few of the younger designers stared at their shoes, the shame of their silence hanging heavy in the air. They knew Ilara's work was brilliant, but they were too afraid to speak. Julian, basking in his victory, didn't notice the subtle shift. He saw only submission. "Don't worry, Ilara," he said with a condescending smile. "We'll find a place for your little sculpture. Maybe in the lobby. The kids will love it." Instead of shrinking, Ilara performed a small, deliberate act of grace. She leaned over her model and made a minuscule adjustment to a tiny, perfectly scaled tree in the miniature plaza at the tower's base. It was a gesture of quiet defiance, of a creator tending to her creation, unbothered by the noise around her. It was an act of ownership. Leo, the intern, watched her hands. They were steady, her focus absolute. His eyes were then drawn to the base of the model. He saw something no one else was looking at. An incredibly complex, interlocking system of support beams and foundational pylons carved into the model's base. It was a dense, powerful-looking structure, a hidden skeleton giving the tower its strength. He glanced back at Julian's shiny render on the screen. The base was obscured by digital shadows and artistic flair. At that moment, a flicker of doubt crossed Leo's face. Julian, misreading Ilara's calm for surrender and the crowd's silence for approval, had made a critical mistake. He believed he had won. He had no idea that the silent girl in the corner wasn't just a model maker. She was a truth-teller, and her model wasn't a sculpture. It was evidence. The tension in the room wasn't coming from Julian's power, but from the quiet, unyielding integrity of Ilara's work, waiting patiently to be seen. Just as Julian was about to move to the next slide, the boardroom doors opened. An old woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense posture walked in. It was Evelyn Reed, the firm's semi-retired co-founder. A legend in the industry, She was a purist who believed that a building's soul was in its structure, not its skin. The room went quiet. Julian's smile tightened. "Evelyn, what a pleasant surprise. Let me show you what we're working on." He gestured grandly toward his screen. But Evelyn ignored him. Her eyes scanned the room and settled on the corner table. She walked past the multi-million-dollar presentation, past the eager executives, and straight toward Alara and her physical model. The symbolic object, once a prop for humiliation, was now the center of gravity in the room. Julian, scrambling to regain control, followed her. "Evelyn, that's just a mock-up. The real design is on the screen. It's a much more efficient way to visualize." Evelyn held up a hand to silence him without even looking at him. Her entire focus was on the model. She ran a finger over the miniature facade, her touch both gentle and analytical. Leo watched, his heart pounding. He saw Evelyn's eyes narrow, taking in the very same details he had noticed. The deep, intricate foundation, the precise alignment of the structural supports. Alara remained silent, standing beside her work like a guardian. She didn't offer explanations. She let the model speak for itself. Evelyn picked up the model. It was heavier than it looked. She felt its perfect balance, its solidity. She turned it over, studying the complex underpinnings that Julian's render had so conveniently ignored. The air crackled. The duel had begun. It wasn't a battle of words, but of work. Of flash versus foundation. And Evelyn Reed, the woman who had built this company on the principle of integrity, was the judge. Evelyn Reed held the model in one hand and finally turned her gaze to the massive, gleaming render on the screen. The room was so quiet, the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. She stared at the screen for a long, silent minute, her eyes tracing the lines of Julian's design. Then she pointed a single, steady finger. "There," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the silence like a razor. "The core alignment. Your render shows the elevator core's load-bearing columns offset by 3 degrees from the subterranean foundation grid." Julian's face went blank. That's a rendering glitch," he stammered, his bravado finally cracking. "The final schematics would—" "It's not a glitch," Evelyn interrupted calmly. She gestured to the physical model in her hand. "It's a design flaw. A fatal one." She then pointed to the corresponding part of Alara's model, where the columns and foundation grid were integrated in a seamless, powerful union. "This model shows the only way this structure can safely stand. The way the load is distributed through the sublevels, it's correct here. Down to the last millimeter." A collective, silent gasp rippled through the room. Julian's face, once beaming with arrogant confidence, was now a mask of pale, clammy fear. A slight tremor started in his hand, and he quickly hid it behind his back. His inner world was collapsing. He had built his career on selling beautiful pictures, and he had just been told his most beautiful picture of all was a lie that could cost lives. The crowd was frozen. No one was looking at the impressive screen anymore. All eyes were on the small, handcrafted model, now held up like a sacred artifact. The symbolic object of Alara's humiliation had become the instrument of Julian's ruin. The cute hobby project was the truth. The billion-dollar digital future was a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. In that moment, the power in the room didn't just shift. It completely reversed, leaving Julian exposed and Alara, in her steadfast silence, as the only person who had been telling the truth all along. The silence that followed was damning. The executives and architects who had laughed just minutes before now looked at Julian with a mixture of shock and contempt. They weren't just looking at a failed design. They were looking at a fraud. The whispers started, quiet at first, then growing into a murmur of disapproval that filled the boardroom. Evelyn Reed gently placed the model back on the table. She turned not to Julian, but to Alara, her eyes filled with a respect that cut deeper than any insult. "Ilara Vance," Evelyn said, her voice clear and firm. "From this moment on, you are the lead architect on the Monarch Tower project. You will report directly to me." This wasn't just a promotion. It was a restoration. It was an opportunity, a validation of her silent, tireless work. Julian, desperate to salvage his career, finally found his voice. "Evelyn, we can't. The clients are expecting my presentation. I have the relationship. The client is my friend of 30 years. Evelyn cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. "He values buildings that don't collapse. He values integrity, a quality you seem to have forgotten." The finality in her voice crushed him. He stood there, utterly defeated, his digital empire crumbling around him. Evelyn then looked at Ilara, waiting for her response. Ilara, after a long moment, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but every person in the room heard it perfectly. She wasn't looking at Julian or the crowd. She was looking at her model, at the foundation that she knew was true. "A building is supposed to protect the people inside it," Ilara said simply. "The foundation is everything." The words landed with the weight of an unshakable truth. It wasn't a boast or a cry of victory. It was the quiet, powerful moral of the entire story, delivered not with anger, but with the humble certainty of a creator who knows her work is true. 6 months later, the culture at Sterling and Reed was unrecognizable. The Monarch Tower project was back on track, its design celebrated not for its flash, but for its innovative structural integrity. Ilara Vance, now the firm's first-ever head of foundational design, stood not in a corner, but at the head of the boardroom table. She was no longer silent. She was confidently explaining the principles of her design to a new, inspired team, using a combination of detailed physical models and precise digital schematics. She was mentoring young designers, teaching them that true innovation begins with an unbreakable foundation. The public impact was immense. A viral article in Forbes titled, "The Analog Revolution: How a Handcrafted Model Saved a Chicago Skyscraper," celebrated the firm's shift back to core principles. The story turned Ilara into an unlikely icon and Sterling and Reed into a national model for ethical architecture. Ms. Reed, seeing the profound change, had institutionalized it. The Ilara Protocol was now mandatory. Every major project required a detailed structural model to be submitted for review alongside digital renders, ensuring that substance could never again be sacrificed for style. Anonymous initial reviews were implemented to remove personal bias from the selection process. Leo, the intern who had first sensed the truth, was now a full-time junior architect on Ilara's team. He looked at her with deep admiration during a late-night work session. "You didn't just fix a building, Ilara," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You fixed this whole place. You taught us how to build right, from the ground up." Ilara simply smiled, a quiet, knowing look in her eyes. The victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to the system she had rebuilt. Julian's sprawling corner office, once a monument to his ego, was now sterile and empty. The sleek, minimalist furniture was gone, leaving only the ghost of his former power. A cleaning crew was wiping down the windows, erasing the last traces of his existence at the firm. On the vast, empty desk, a single object remained: his expensive metallic digital stylus, now disconnected and useless. A relic of a fallen king. The scene cut to Julian, months later, working in a small, cramped cubicle at a lesser-known commercial design firm. The glamour was gone. The power was gone. He was just another designer, staring at a simple blueprint on his screen for a suburban strip mall. He traced the lines of the building's foundation, his movements slow, his face etched with a permanent shadow of regret. He leaned back, the squeak of his cheap office chair echoing in the quiet room. He closed his eyes, and a single, whispered thought escaped his lips, a confession to himself. The foundation. The screen split, contrasting his lonely, dim cubicle with a bright, vibrant shot of Alara and her team, laughing and celebrating around the magnificent, completed model of the Monarch Tower. His fall was as quiet and absolute as her rise had been. He hadn't been destroyed by an enemy. He had been undone by his own empty core. True strength is never the loudest voice in the room. It's the quiet integrity of a foundation built to last. True greatness isn't claimed. It's carefully, meticulously, and honestly constructed. The final image is of Alara in the firm's newly established workshop. A young, nervous intern is struggling with a difficult joint on a small model. Alara walks over, not with instructions, but with a quiet presence. She takes her own worn, wooden pencil, the same one from that fateful day, and gently hands it to the intern. She gives a small, encouraging nod, a silent transfer of a legacy. She isn't just building towers anymore. She's building the next generation of true architects. They tried to bury her talent, but they didn't realize it was a seed. Have you ever seen quiet brilliance ignored? Follow for more stories where true integrity always wins.